Welcome back to Morning Shot. So, for those of you who may recall, last week we did a video around Dis-Chem. This was around Dis-Chem's policy not to promote any white people. We also then covered the subsequent retraction from Dis-Chem, who said, no, sorry, it wasn't us, we didn't mean it that way. And here to join me to discuss this topic is Russell Lamberti, who is the Director of Sakeliga. Hello, Russell.
Byron, how you doing? It's good to be with you.
Great. So, I know you saw the whole Dis-Chem, let's call it the Dis-Chem debacle. What's your take on it?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing to say is that what we saw there in the form of a kind of, I suppose, a leaked or some kind of a exposed internal memo is really not that out of the ordinary for large sections of corporate South Africa. That this one just happened to kind of get out there, and when it leaves that corporate bubble, um, everyone's quite shocked at just exactly the kinds of norms and standards that have been set in mainstream corporate South Africa, which is that these are highly racialized environments, highly politically sensitive environments, and environments in which the leadership of companies talk very bluntly and openly about implementing um, not only the letter of the law, but going above and beyond and sort of preempting further uh, changes in rules and legislation and statutes and so on. And we got a glimpse of this. So I think the first take home is this is not unique. It's not unique to Dis-Chem. And it's very much just what goes on in large sections of corporate South Africa, and the public is right to react the way they did. It is unacceptable. It is harmful. It's not taking society, the economy forward in any meaningful way. And in some ways, it's good that this came to light because this has been going on in corporate South Africa for many, many years, and this is the discourse in much of what passes for doing business. And it's actually, it's disappointing because companies like Dis-Chem and many others are inherently good companies. They've built incredible success and they provide very good products and services to people. But they have gotten waylaid and sidetracked by these political agendas and political priorities, and taken together as a whole, it's very harmful for the country and the economy.
Yeah, so I mean, I covered the sections on this in our podcast, and I did draw reference to what the laws are. And as a CEO of myself, I drew reference to how they apply to the business environment. So, as we discussed before coming on air, there's the law, and then there's the moral obligations of the individual, which is to be non racial, but that's not what the law says. Now, we are expecting the Employment Equity Act, the amendment bill, which will allow the relevant minister to basically wave a wand and just say you need to have proportionality in your business and it needs to look like this. And that's likely to impact JSE listed companies quite a lot because obviously the laws are specifically targeted around JSE. Now, the reason it's targeted around those kind of laws is because those companies can't just show a quota share in terms of proportionality of who owns the business, because typically they're listed and they're owned by hedge funds. So as a result, we are seeing a large amount of corporate South Africa, as you rightly say, preempt these rules and basically just starting to get rid of people where they can. So Dis-Chem's memo basically said if you've got a white person and a black person, you need to promote the black person because of proportionality. And then they also said, but if you only have a white person and they're the only one that you can employ, you still need to employ a black person, even if that person isn't fit for the job, which obviously puts a arrow in the eye of meritocracy. We obviously don't employ on merit anymore, which is obviously the whole point of cadre deployment and the rest of the bull rubbish that occurs in
Yeah.
South Africa. I mean, the story is well known. But you've got an interesting take on it, which is how can Sakeliga, as a company, help you basically ignore the rules and just carry on as if the rules didn't exist? How do you flip the government off and continue to run it. So what's your take on that?
Well, let's couch it in the following terms. Businesses face a choice. They've got the growing tentacles of BEE that happen through procurement policies, through statute, through law, through regulation. Just this vast web of kind of compulsion towards implementing race-based economic policy. Um, and the calculus has been: do you just grit your teeth, spend the money on compliance and get it done and just satisfy the so-called sovereign, um, and as a result then sort of fly under the radar and be a good little boy, or do you fight back? Fighting back comes with costs. It's difficult to coordinate, and you might see only long-term benefits. And if you're lucky, if you're unlucky, the fight back might cost you tremendously. It might sit very poorly with your shareholders, with your funders. There's all kinds of implications. Maybe even with your customers, depending on the kind of business you are. So there's no question that these policies, that were really started in the 90s and found sort of solidification in things like the BEE Act in 2003 and 4, these have placed businesses under tremendous pressure. And so compromises, in some ways, have been necessary. You could say rational. They've served business purposes. They've served the purpose of just getting on with doing business, and kind of being able to keep your head above water as a business by keeping the government happy, as it were. But these compromises, as we argue, have come at a great price. Whenever you optimize for state ideology and compliance with that, you do not optimize for value creation. And what we argue is that writ large, at scale, that's actually has produced tremendous economic harm. And the question becomes, at what point is it beneficial to stop complying, stop taking that path of least resistance, and actually saying, well, if we keep going down this road, there's going to be no meaningful economy to speak of. The JSE, we're talking about listed companies and large corporates. I mean, the JSE is facing a wave of delistings. There hasn't been net new listings on the JSE for a very long time. And corporate South Africa's earnings are, under massive strain. And value creation in large corporate South Africa has been stagnant for a very long time. Everyone knows that this is an incredibly weak, stagnant, failing economy. I think there's now been the equivalent of something like 100 days of load shedding this year. It's the most on record, and a very large portion of that is stage 4 to stage 6. I mean, we know we're in an incredibly difficult, bad situation. And so what we're saying at Sakeliga is it's time to sit back and join a community of businesses that are going in another direction, that are actually pooling their resources, moving away from the problem of acting as an isolated individual company that is prone to that can be prone to being targeted, and actually joining a group and a network of businesses that are going in the opposite direction. Now, just to finish off the answer, is to say that companies that are enmeshed and embedded in the BEE system, as it were, many of them realize that it's been a mistake, or that it's gone too far, that the tentacles have reached too far, and that the goalposts are continuing to shift, and that their businesses face tremendous threat over the coming years, as these tentacles tighten. And they realize now that they need to kind of extricate themselves from BEE. And I think so it's not to bring kind of condemnation on businesses that find themselves BE compliant and who've played the game up until now, but many of them want to exit that game. And I think they should be thinking about something like a 3 to 5 year meaningful, genuine exit strategy where you actually don't play the game, where you repudiate the business ethics of what this is, which is um, a kind of revolutionary business ethic that's been introduced and slammed on top of, let's say, common commercial law that's been developed over many many centuries. So I think in the first instance, it's to know that there's a club of businesses that are in Sakeliga that are starting to create and form a different business ethos. And in the second instance, when you join Sakeliga, you fund Sakeliga, and when you fund Sakeliga with thousands of other businesses, you form a pool of funds and capital that is becomes available for collective action like litigation against BEE. So there is a letter of the law. It is trying to be increased. Those tentacles are trying to grow, and we, through litigation, want to start chopping those off so that BEE can't be used as a mechanism for determining business licensing, mergers and acquisitions, as the Competition Commission is trying to do, and so on and so forth. We've got to contain this beast where it is for now. Going for the heart of the beast is probably unrealistic for now. We've got to contain it and slowly kind of work our way strategically through the different problems of BE. But Sakeliga brings a kind of collective team effort in doing that, and puts a flag in the ground of business ethics that says, you know what, we don't think, not only is this harmful and all that, we just don't think it's necessary and right. We think that there's far more value to be created and far more benefit for the ordinary South African if business gets on with producing great value for customers and shareholders.
Yeah, so I mean, Ramon and I often say this, and that is that corporate South Africa has basically become a sellout to the governing party. And the overall perspective appears to be, well, if we comply, they'll leave us alone and they won't come for us, really. And there seems to be a failing of understanding of ideology of the governing party. They don't really seem to understand the beast that they're dealing with. They don't seem to understand the ANC's approach to, as an example, balance of forces. They don't seem to understand that if they give them a hand, they'll take your whole arm. Like, that's how it works.
Yeah.
There's the whole boiling frog syndrome. The more it will go, the laws get ramped up over time, and then eventually they kind of get what they want. And corporate South Africa is now in a situation where the water's getting quite hot. They've already been boiling for some time, and they were like, if we just complied and we sat here, they'd leave us alone. They won't ramp up the pressure. But they have ramped up the pressure.
Yeah.
And obviously the Employment Equity Act is seeming like it's just going to be, the tap on full boil now. Now, the problem is, and
Sorry, Byron, I know you've got a train of thought that you want to carry on with there, but I just quickly want to jump in and say that, so please hold your thought, that it's not just that the policy pot of boiling water is boiling ever hotter, but it's that in complying and creating that kind of collective compliance, you've actually destroyed the economy, and that's the very economy that these businesses need to operate in, to find customers in, to sell their products into. So collectively, this has been quite a disaster.
yeah, but then I would argue, and it's an argument I've had with Ramon many times, is that corporate South Africa doesn't actually care about the economy or the customers that they sell to, because you get to a point where it's like Coca-Cola. I'm too large to fail. Where else are you going to buy your product? So yeah, okay, maybe the environment isn't great and I have less people buying my cans, but as a CEO, I've got what, a 2-3 year return. I'm going to be the CEO for 2-3 years, appointed by the board. After that, all I got to do is have my share options. My share options will pay out, and I go get to live in Ibiza. So what do I care about whether or not the economy in 5 years from now is going to be like
Yeah.
absolutely on its knees? Like, I don't care. I'm only here for a couple of years. And that is a problem that you end up having with any kind of stakeholder-based business that's on a stock exchange. Now, obviously, when you start to ramp that up even further with things like ESG scores and all the other bull rubbish that's going on around the world, then it does get to a point where corporate South Africans never care because they almost have a degree of bailout, whether that bailout be government or not. So,
Yeah.
arguably, from my perspective, I don't think they give a damn about the economy. I think they give a damn about short-term games here and there, play a couple games, maybe maximize your share value and piss off and go live in Ibiza. I
I
think
think
that's
I
what's
think it.
happening.
So look, I think it's a yes and a no. I think that incentive certainly exists, and what we're facing here is a kind of coordination problem.
Mm.
Everyone knows that deep down, everyone knows that by playing these sorts of games, you're eroding and corroding long-term value, right? You're diminishing the prospects of a viable future for your children, your grandchildren, and society at large in a generation or two's time or less. Um, and I think Sakeliga is saying we are an organization that aims to solve that coordination problem.
Mm.
Now, there's never a perfect solution. There's trade-offs. Um, but I think what we're saying is we have a mechanism that through funding, membership, and network creation can start to solve this coordination problem and start to shift the mindset of a certain section of business towards longer term, let's call it meta investing, investing in the structure that enables commerce to take place, right? The governance mechanisms, the financial mechanisms, the security mechanisms. We saw KZN burning down a year and a half ago. Um, how do we secure the business environment? How do we invest in these kind of meta structures without a mechanism to actually coordinate that stuff? And when it's not the state which is failing, so if the state is failing, and the state typically plays that kind of coordination role, best case scenario, the state's kind of looking after that stuff. But when it's not, when it's failing, you either create an alternative mechanism of coordination, and you make it a viable place for people to invest and see a kind of return on in that meta sense, or you give over to asset stripping and ultimate kind of gangsterism. The economy reverts to a kind of gangster economy. And the truth is that we're seeing both. We're seeing groups like Sakeliga starting to push back, starting to create mechanisms of coordination and investment in improving the governance environment. And we're starting to see gangsterism in parts of the countries proliferate and dominate certain sectors and certain areas.
Yeah, like the
We're in a
construction mafia.
correct, and we're in a real battle here, right? And
Mm.
and I would argue that all things considered, we are arguably um, moving too slowly. When I say we, I just mean the collective we, in the sense of the guys who want to push back on this. Sakeliga is in the process of ramping up its growth and its strategy, and we got very exciting things planned. The best time to do this was 20 years ago, and the second best time is now. and and so we think we are able to solve that kind of coordination problem. It's you've hit on exactly the right point. Is that very few people see the benefit of themselves as an individual business, investing on their own in some aspect of this
No,
kind of
I don't think that's entirely
market
true.
structure that they don't see
Yeah.
the return benefits.
I don't see that as entirely true. I think that the business that does see it is the business that's a small owned family business, the business that intends to be there for the next 15, 20 years running the business. I think that type of business probably very much does see the benefit in an improved economy, an improved workforce, a better labor force.
No question
Because
that they definitely see it. I just think that there's a lot of they're small. There's only so much they can do, and they're making margins on their business, and those profits are used to survive, to maybe reinvest in a little bit of growth, maybe maintain some capital. um, and I think the point is that, so you're 100% right. I think that there's a lot of smaller firms. Look, there's a lot of larger firms that see the big picture as well, right, and that are trying to act in the right way. And in fact, more and more those kind of guys are talking, those larger businesses are talking to Sakeliga and getting interested in what we're doing. I think the point is that if you try and kind of think that you have to solve this as a lone business, you get overwhelmed. The cost is too much. creating a mechanism for coordination and for pooling of capital. That's what Sakeliga is doing, and we think that can be effective, because then even the smallest business can contribute to the solution. If it's a few hundred rand a month paid out of a business, which is very low cost for a small business, all the way up to tens of thousands of rands a month for our largest contributors, our largest members. Whatever is appropriate to your size of enterprise, you can actually contribute to the solution, and that's exciting.
So coming back then to the Dis-Chem comment, obviously I know Sakeliga is pursuing an action against Dis-Chem for it. Tell me a little bit more about the action that you're pursuing against Dis-Chem on behalf of your members that are for what they've done.
No, look, so I think that there might be a misunderstanding there. We have no action planned against Dis-Chem. Our beef is ultimately not with Dis-Chem, the business, and we don't intend in any way to launch any kind of attack on them. We've shown their pressures that they face and the weaknesses within them. The way that they've rolled over and capitulated so easily is certainly to their discredit. But we don't intend to take any kind of action, and certainly not litigative action.
So is it better
them.
to then say that what you're using is you're doing study, if you will, or a case scenario to highlight just exactly how corporate South Africa is falling over itself, and with these laws,
Correct.
in many instances, as you've said, gone over and above. So it's a case study to show the population, well, look, this is the situation with corporate South Africa, and we really should now get to a point where basically we just resist and just say, okay, it's enough. We're not following what you do anymore. But then the counter argument to that would be, but there has legal consequences of this. If it's Dis-Chem, it could be delisted from the JSE, or the fine is 10% of turnover, which is a shitload of money, man. So what do they do? Like, how do you resist when that's the law?
Yeah. So firstly, you've summarized it well. This is a case study. This is an example. This is a symptom. Dis-Chem is really a symptom of a much bigger melee of corporate governance and of corporate ethics that really has to be restored from kind of the ground up. It's been so damaged in South Africa. So yeah, I think that's important in terms of resisting. Yeah, it's easy to say disobey the law, but if you face genuine threat of very, very significant fines, that is something that has to be taken into account. And that's why Sakeliga does not say, right, boys and girls, it's time just to throw the law back in the government's face and revolt. We have to be strategic. We have to be smart about it. Where certain laws are unavoidable and where turnover fines will be in fact levied for not hitting certain targets and so on, those need to be taken into account. The corporate strategy needs to consider that very, very seriously. What I would say, though, a few principles is a lot of the laws, or a lot of the expectations, let's say, around race, around affirmative action, BE, employment, employee quotas, and so on, are not statute, are not hard law. A lot of it is expectation. A lot of it is sort of what is sort of the done thing. And I think that so in the first instance, like with tax, the other day Davy Root said people should be paying
The least
as
amount of
little
tax possible. That's
the
their
least amount of tax
obligation
possible.
now. Yeah, I read that.
Do the least amount of BE compliance possible. Do the least amount of affirmative action compliance possible, and join a business community that's doing the same thing, that doesn't regard it as a virtue, that you've got a higher BE score, some higher kind of transformation or diversity score, that regards it as a virtue that you do good, honest, clean, valuable, innovative business, right? Um, and you minimize that compliance. We spend time as a group delegitimizing the business ethics of it, and then you're funding an organization that can actually fight those regulations from a litigation perspective. So we want to push back real laws so that our members and society at large, whether they're our members or not, who will benefit from the victories we have in court, will actually be able to operate lawfully by not having to abide by these draconian requirements. So
Yeah.
it's a piecemeal, step by step process, but it starts with not going over and above what's required of you, and not actually preempting laws, and actually starting to fight back. And what I believe we will see is, if we start to see real pushback from corporate South Africa, we're actually going to see progress. We're actually going to see benefits on this. And then finally, at some stage, there's going to have to be a degree of non-compliance. And I think that's when we've got to look at what does it mean for a group like Sakeliga, that's coordinating, that's big, that's well funded, to see some of this non-compliance and use it as test cases to actually then litigate, where it simply becomes unviable for businesses to adhere to some of this nonsense. For example, like your workforce must represent some population demographic in some region, that's determined by a politician. I mean, sheer absurdity. And I think there's lots of grounds for pushing back, for not complying, and then pushing back hard in the courts, and then beyond the courts as well.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just to show the audience how stupid that would be. That would be like going to the Black Business Council and saying, "Well, you got to follow the population. So can you have at least 4% whiteys, please? Because demographics and all. We know you're the Black Business Chambers, but hey, like demographics." But
Yeah,
there's a couple of points on things that you said there. I just want to kind of summarize and then just say my final piece on. And that is what you said is that there is a degree of expectation of what people should do where they have to follow it, but that's not actually the law. It's just like something they made up. And I see that quite a bit. It's around business ownership. They say, well, why should I create a business if I have to just give it over to someone else? There's actually no requirements with a small business to give over any equity to somebody who hasn't been an investor just because of being countering. That does start to occur when the business gets to a certain size, granted, but
but again, only if you want to do business under
interaction with the
certain
state,
conditions, right? Correct.
which is where you come in. So what you're saying is that you're there to basically provide clarity on rules that people might not be clear on. The second thing is that some, I suppose, government will take your statements as being anti-transformation. They'll say, oh, well, that means that you don't really want to include the black individual into the economy, the previously disadvantaged. And all you're trying to do is hold on to white monopoly capital, and it's all the time. So you're going to have to resist against that. But
For sure.
outside of that, the final point is because there are laws there. The laws are becoming more draconian, and you are going to have to litigate. At the moment, nobody wants to litigate because there's a fear that the Constitutional Court sides with the ANC and basically says, well, the Constitution does say something about, representation and equitable redistribution. And so, it's it is a real thing. And then the argument is that the minute it gets rubber stamped by the Constitutional Court, the floodgates open and that's it, you've lost everything. So, but at some point in time, you are going to have to litigate because otherwise we have the boiling frog syndrome. Yeah. And I know that loads of people that are watching this will be saying the same. Well, what are you going to do? You can take them to court. Are you going to win? What's the chances of the prospects of winning? But it's going to have to happen at some point in time.
Yeah. So could I just make two comments there?
Of course.
So on the idea of transformation, transformation is a word that doesn't actually have any particular meaning unless you attach a proper defined meaning to it, right? That a butterfly can transform anything. There's transformation in all sorts of ways. So when you define transformation as BEE and race quotas and these sorts of things, then we're against transformation. Proudly so. If you define transformation as moving from a rigged, very one-sided kind of economy, with all manner of interventions and prohibitions on doing business and constraints on freedom and so on before 1994, and you want to transform that to an economy that's free and open, where business thrives and community and societies thrive, you know, that's transformation too, and we're very pro that kind of transformation. So, we want a strongly growing economy with broadening opportunities. That's real transformation. That's what we're pro. When it comes to the courts are part of a broader strategy. I must emphasize this: Sakeliga does not see the courts and litigation as the end and as the be all and end all of our playbook. If that were the case, we would be an organization at risk of being stunted and of ultimately not succeeding. We don't
Mm.
think that the courts can deliver all the outcomes we want. The courts are part, and litigation is part of an escalation process of resistance. We disagree with certain policies where we think they're unjust, we think they're unconstitutional, we think they're harmful. We're going to take our case and ask the court for relief. Some courts, still in South Africa, believe it or not, have the capacity to provide that relief to some degree. And we understand their limitations and we use that as much as possible. And if you do lose and if you don't get the relief that you seek, and in fact, these laws become more draconian and they strangle more, and the courts cease to be a viable option, or you hit the limitations of what litigation can do, you then move to the next level. You then move to the next level of resistance. And that's where you do start getting into coordinated civil disobedience and ways and means of essentially saying these things are harmful to us, they harm our vital interests, they're untenable, and we're not going to abide by them. And then you have to escalate how you engage with the state and with the legal realm. Um, we are prepared to go beyond litigation if necessary, but we are also willing to use the court system as it is in South Africa. And I would argue there is a lot more scope for using litigation and um, for applying that strategy than people think. It's a difficult strategy to apply. You've got to have your ducks in a row, and you've got to produce very coherent kind of, let's say, jurisprudence, as it were, or legal cases. But it's definitely an avenue that I think is still underexploited, and Sakeliga has a good track record of being able to use the courts effectively. So this is a multi-pronged strategy, the courts of which are one part of that. Establishing a network that operates by a different standard and mutually reinforces itself through trade and transactions and business ethics. That's also where we're taking things, and we're very excited about that.
Yeah. So I mean, I like everything that you have to say because it's very much in keeping with what Morning Shot says. And Morning Shot often says, build communities of your own, become independent of the state. If you don't like something about the state, don't think that the state is the final arbitrator. Obviously communities and individuals are more powerful than the state. But obviously, people don't always understand how that works in real life. And it's great to have you on to explain how Sakeliga sees that kind of independent group mentality and how it can be used to change government policy. And I agree. If corporate South Africa all as a unanimous whole said to the ANC, enough's enough, the ANC would have to change their tune because you need corporate South Africa. It needs the citizens of the state, who are the taxpayers, who fund them, to have a degree of buy-in. And sometimes that buy-in is complicit. It's not express, it's just implied because you said nothing. And so your point is obviously, stand up and say something and do the alternative. And I agree with all of that. Is there anything else you wanted
Thanks,
to
Byron.
add?
All I want to add is a very short point to say that Sakeliga, our mission in the broadest sense, is to become a strong enough business community, a strong and independent enough business community to resist state power, to actually provide a real check and balance on harmful policies and on state failure, to be able to fill the gaps that government leaves as it fails, as the state fails. There's gaps. There's services that don't get delivered anymore. There's governance that doesn't get rendered anymore. Someone has to fill that, and that's either going to be gangsters or it's going to be strong, honest, reputable organizations that have the common good in every, in their interest, which is to produce a flourishing, peaceful, stable society and secure society. So that is what we're doing in the broadest possible sense. And so we are not just we don't just exist to write clever opinion pieces and to tweet tweets and to engage in sort of petty litigation. Our goal is to provide a formidable check against what has become a very harmful and failing state.
Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, mate.
Take it easy.